The world runs on open source software. If it ever went away, software would collapse. We know about things like Git and Docker and React, which are fully open source projects. But have you ever thought of the fact that almost all web hosting, including practically everything in the cloud, runs on Linux, which is open source? Most websites use NPM packages or NuGet packages that are open source packages that support that site. So we also have Android and Firefox and Postgres and Chrome and lots more that are open source projects or based upon open source projects. For decades, the world has depended on open source to power practically everything that we rely on. But now AI is threatening open source. Let's look at how in this video. Now, every action you take has a cost. And too often, we look at the benefits of an action and forget to look at the drawbacks. In this series, we're looking at the costs associated with AI in various sectors in order to have a better understanding of what we're giving up in order to gain the benefits of AI. This isn't about hurting AI or hating AI or wanting AI to go away, but it's about making sure we look at the pros and cons of our decisions. Now, if you want to support this channel and the free content that I produce, consider purchasing one of my courses at IamTimCorey.com. I have master courses on C#, web development, and Unity, as well as training courses that cover a wide variety of topics. The income from those sales directly funds the free content that I create here. So let's look at how AI can hurt open source. And we're going to start with this article here on how AI wiped out 80% of Tailwind's revenue. Now, to be clear, when we talk about this particular situation, that doesn't mean we're just talking about this situation. There's a representation here of how some open source systems are maintained and paid for. I want to be clear here. Every open source project that you use is paid for by someone. They might say, Tim, no, it's not. No, it's not. Some are free. Yes, when you use it, you're using the free. You're using the value that comes out of it. But someone paid for it. Someone did. Now, it may be that it's a pet project to someone. It's their hobby project they do in their free time. Guess what? They gave their free time in order to give you something. Or maybe they did it at work, where they built something and then said their employer said, yes, you can give that away for free. So their company paid for it. Or maybe it's a mixture of both. Or maybe open source contributions help fund it, where people sponsored that project. Or they said, hey, I'll give you a coffee. By the way, those links almost never work. People almost never use those links. I'm not saying no one does, but just know when you see that link, use it if you can help it. If you can afford it, use it, because very few people do. So someone paid for everything that you're seeing. So how does Tailwind do it? Well, let's look. So first off, just to set a level here, Tailwind is a default of many framework and tools like Ruby on Rails, Phoenix, and Next.js. If you're a .NET web developer, you may have looked at, should I use Bootstrap, which is also an open source project, or should I use Tailwind? So this is a very common, very popular project that really saves people a lot of time. Working with CSS can be difficult. It can be tricky, and getting a good foundation in your CSS is really important. And so these projects are really helpful in giving you a leg up and getting you started in a project, getting you going, and doing a lot of the heavy lifting for your layouts, your style, your design. And then you can just tweak from there. So it really does save thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. It saved lots of time because they can use Tailwind as the starting point. But what you may not know is that Tailwind has a paid service called Tailwind Plus that offers premium components and templates. So they have a paid version of Tailwind, an upgrade of Tailwind that helps fund their free content. If that sounds familiar, I started this video talking about how if you want to fund my content and you are able and you want to help, then you can go to iamtimcorey.com and purchase a course. That'll benefit you, but it will also benefit everyone else. That's the same thing that Tailwind is doing. My business model is their business model practically. So this is how they fund their free content. Now, what does that do? Let's take a minute to think about this. They are not getting in your face. They are not saying, hey, you can't use Tailwind unless you pay for Tailwind Plus. This is how they fund that free content. This is how they even let people know that Tailwind Plus even exists. The flow is a user says, hey, pre-LLM, a user says, hey, I need to know how to do this in Tailwind. So they Google that, and Google says, here's a link to the documentation where it tells you how to do that. Super helpful. So Google gets to share the link, and it also gets to share their paid links as well around that to fund that search engine traffic. Then the user goes to Tailwind's site, and they see that Tailwind Plus exists. They're in the context of, I have to know how to do something in Tailwind, and they can see that Tailwind offers Tailwind Plus, and that can give them additional components and templates. And so it's an ad, yes, but it's an ad in a place where you're already looking for things like this, so it could be a solution to your problem. And so this is how they don't get in your face. This is how they don't overwhelm you with ads everywhere. I think we're all tired of ads, right? I think we're all tired of just having stuff shoved in our faces. And so the idea that a company says, hey, you know what? We're not going to demand that every person who uses Tailwind give us a little bit. We're not going to put things behind a paywall. What we're going to do is we're going to let you have all of Tailwind, but then some additional things that, yes, we'll put behind a paywall, but that will fund our free content. And we're only going to basically tell you about it when you go to the documentation. So that was their idea. That was their way of supporting the business and supporting their employees. Because yes, they have paid employees. Someone is paying for Tailwind. And that someone is the people who are paying for Tailwind Plus. Now, look how the process changed. With the advent of LLMs, the user says, hey, I have a problem, and asks the LLM, not Google. The LLM says, here's a code snippet. And by the way, if they go to Google now and ask that question, maybe they're saying, hey, I'm just going to Google it like I used to. But Google gives them the answer instead of giving them the link to the documentation first. So the link to the documentation may be there, but it's going to be buried down below the answer. So now the way that they used to fund Tailwind is that you go to documentation and you see that, hey, I could pay for something and get something that I might need. But now the LLMs come along and say, you know what? We're going to take all your documentation. We're going to ingest all that information as well as from other sources, but we're going to take all that documentation and we're going to give it to the user. Not you, we are. And so because we're doing that, then we can give the user the information directly. Because it's better, right, to have it directly answered. But what it does is they cut out Tailwind in all of their web traffic, at least all of their human web traffic. And as a result, no one sees the idea of upgrading to Google+. And as a side note here, yes, this is a side note, but reading documentation is not just about finding the answer to your specific question you have right now. One of the benefits of reading the documentation is that when you do, then you will also be able to see other things around the documentation, other things that might be useful that you didn't realize to even ask for, including Tailwind Plus in this case, but maybe other things that it can do you didn't even know that it could do. So reading documentation is valuable. Not knowing to ask for that information is a problem. You don't know what you don't know. And LLMs kind of hide that from you. But okay, so this is what's happening to Tailwind. How is that impacting them? Well, they've had to lay off 75% of the engineering team. And why? Because traffic has gone down 40% since early 2023. And as a result, 80% of the revenue has gone away from Tailwind Plus. Now, you may say, in this specific situation, Tailwind should do something different. That can be fair. But we're not talking about one specific situation. We're talking about a concept, an idea, a much broader picture, and using this as our example of that. So what should Tailwind do? What can they do to support Tailwind? Because again, they used this to fund their engineering team, and 75% of their engineering team got laid off. Now that directly impacts those engineers. However, what does it also impact? It also impacts every single person who uses Tailwind. Why? Because 75% of their engineering department went away. What do you think those engineers were doing? They were working on Tailwind. So now 3/4 of the people who were dedicated to Tailwind are gone, which means that Tailwind does not get features as fast. It does not get as many features. It does not get as many bug fixes. And no, just throwing more AI at it doesn't solve the problem. In fact, it's going to make it worse. So we all get a worse project, a worse Tailwind, because of the fact that people aren't going to the documentation and not seeing Tailwind Plus. The opportunities here for Tailwind, they have to pivot. But how do they pivot? Well, they'll probably have to do some kind of paywall where more of Tailwind isn't available unless you pay. And that hurts everybody. Okay, so that's just Tailwind. Let's kind of follow up here though. I thought these two lines were important. You and I use open source every day. While free for us, people working on these projects have to make a living. That I think is really important to understand. Everyone pays for open source, or open source is paid for by someone. And these people who are working on open source can't just always volunteer their time. It's being paid for by someone, and those people have to make a living. Yes, maybe they have jobs, and that's great. And I've seen open source projects where a person has a job and so they just work on it as a nice to do in their free time. But then when they lose their job or their job changes and they don't have enough time in their job, the project withers and dies because it was being funded by their free time that's no longer available. So people that are working on this project have to make a living. And the rise of LLMs is disrupting the traditional way that people interact with documentation. So in this specific case, the way that we funded Tailwind was to interact with documentation, and that's gone. So some sites, the way that you fund the site or fund the thing the site does is by viewing the ads on the site. Maybe it's not, specific to that company. They just have ads on the site. Well, if traffic goes away, that funding does too. And so now, therefore, that's not paying for the open source anymore. So however you monetize open source, most of that is going away. And that's a problem because guess what happens? If people aren't being paid, if they're not making a living, then the thing they're doing goes away. And if we're not careful, we lose open source projects. And we already are because of how this is playing out. Let's look next at, that was the funding. Let's look now at how AI is just wearing out and damaging the open source maintainers. So open source maintainers are drowning in AI generated pull requests. Enterprise teams are next. So this is, I think, a good kind of keep your head up here. Think about this. This is the canary in the coal mine. This is the indicator of what's to come. So AI is flooding open source with low quality pull requests. Learn how enterprise teams can avoid burnout by fixing the code validation bottleneck. So it's saying basically, we're seeing this already in open source, and this is going to start trickling into the enterprise soon. Okay. Something is breaking in open source, and it should alarm every engineering leader pushing coding agents into their organization. Over the past year, open source maintainers have been overwhelmed by a flood of low-quality AI-generated pull requests. Verbose changes with nonsensical descriptions, contributions that submitters cannot explain when questioned, code that looks plausible on the surface but crumbles under a review. These are different ways that these pull requests just aren't valuable. So the first one, verbose changes with nonsensical descriptions. This is stuff that, you can probably clean out pretty easily. Look at the description and go, it doesn't look right, right? The problem is that AI writes human speech in a way that looks right. So it's not just a matter of, using a whole lot of consonants that have no vowels, right? Like, no, it's the fact that it looks like a paragraph. It looks like it might even be right, but when you actually think about it, it's nonsensical. So that may be a few minutes of code review per issue, but it still takes a few minutes of your time just to review that and go, wait, this doesn't make sense. And so if you are quote unquote harsh, you would reject that, which I think you should. Next, contributions that submitters cannot explain when questioned. And we'll look more at this in a future article, but this is one where someone turned AI loose on their favorite project or open source project, and they said, hey, I want you to add this feature or fix this bug, whatever. And then when they submit the pull request and the maintainer says, hey, I have a question about this, the person who submitted it says, I can't answer that because I didn't write the code. So that's a problem because, first of all, if you can't answer the questions, well, then who can? The AI, that's not how this works. We should be able to have questions answered because you have to be able to say, why'd you do it this way? Why was this chosen versus that? And what we don't want, and what's happening, is that you're just playing a telephone game to a person's LLM. Well, at that point, and we'll again talk about this later, but at that point, why shouldn't the maintainer just use the LLM? Why have the person in the middle? So contributions where you can't explain what's going on, that's a problem, should also be rejected. And then code, this is the most dangerous one, code that looks plausible on the surface, but crumbles under review. So this, I think, is an order of the least amount of time the maintainer has to spend on the pull request to the most. This one is the most time, where the code looks right. And it looks like it might be a solution to the problem. But then the more you kind of poke at it, the more you test it out and try and figure it out, you figure out this isn't going to solve our actual problem. Or this has some weird bugs in it. Ones that are, maybe not the primary way it does things, but we probably have to write some new unit tests to kind of catch these bugs because this is, all new territory. So that takes a lot of time and effort. And what's happening is it's overwhelming maintainers. So the Jazz Band Collective, a well-known Python project ecosystem, was forced to shut down entirely this year. Its lead maintainers cited the unsustainable volume of AI-generated spam pull requests and issues as its primary driver. So this collective was shut down entirely because it just got overwhelmed with junk from AI. So we're losing open source projects, open source collectives because of AI junk contributions, spam, essentially. Think back to the early email days where you didn't have a good spam filter, but spam was coming, and it felt like email was almost unusable because there was so much junk that you can't find the good stuff. Even now, if I go to I have a Gmail account that's a personal Gmail account because I have YouTube TV, and so I had a personal Gmail account. But if I go to the spam folder in there, every once in a while there is a legitimate email, but there are thousands of emails that are just junk. So finding that one is really hard to do. And if I had to maintain that, I had to go through that, I wouldn't. I just delete the account. Okay. Other projects are feeling the same pressure. So the Godot game engine, which if you're into developing games for for the different platforms, there's Unreal, Unity, and then Godot. So Godot works with C#, and it's been more and more popular recently. Well, this Remy, I can't pronounce that last name. I'm sorry, Remy, has described triaging AI slop as draining and demoralizing. If you rely on something, let's say you rely on Godot. So you're building a game and you rely on Godot, and you hear a maintainer of Godot say that AI is demoralizing and draining. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel confident that Godot will be here forever? Because at some point, people who are demoralized and are drained get burned out. They leave. So there has to be a solution, because if not, the things that you rely on go away. So Daniel Stenberg, the creator of curl is a really popular system, has canceled the bug bounty program because they became magnets for low effort AI submissions. We're going to hear more about curl in a little bit, but this was a program where if you invested the time and you found a bug in curl, they would pay you for that. They'd say, hey, we want to make sure that curl is as safe as can be. So if you spend the time and you find a bug, we'll pay you for it. We'll pay you so we can make sure there's no bugs in curl, because half the internet relies on curl. So that was a big deal. But now, because of AI, that bug bounty program went away. So they're no longer incentivizing people to spend the time to find the bugs. So what happens? The people that were finding the bugs might not spend as much effort, or might not spend any effort in looking for bugs in curl, which means that curl is not safer. It's more dangerous now because it has less people looking for bugs. So AI made curl less safe. Okay, that's a problem. The pattern is consistent. Maintainers spend a disproportionate share of their time evaluating code that should never have been submitted, which crowds out the genuine contributions and accelerates burnout. So the people who are spending the time to do the right thing, to work on it the right way, to genuinely contribute to open source, they're getting pushed aside by a flood of AI contributions, most of which are junk. As a result, even the people who are putting the time to do it the right way are getting discouraged and demoralized and ignored because they're just lost in a sea of junk. So this is not just an open source problem. It's a preview of what's coming for the enterprise engineering teams. So this is what's happening in the open source community right now, but the same thing will be happening in enterprises as the idea of using agents and using autonomous development ramps up in the enterprise. So a non-technical team member using a coding agent for the first time can generate working-looking code in minutes. Working-looking, as in it looks right, it may even work and compile and pass the unit tests. And that's a non-technical team member. So do they know how to answer questions with the code? No. Do they know how to fix the code if it goes wrong? No. Do they know how to even test the code to make sure it's all correct and not just saying it's correct? No. That's a problem. So this last paragraph here, as one contributor put it, if that were really what maintainers wanted, meaning the AI generation of code, if that was really what maintainers wanted, they could do it themselves. If maintainers just wanted you to set your AI loose on this new feature or a bug fix, they could do that themselves. The value of the contributions were never just the code. That's so important. Too many non-developers and junior developers think that the most important part of software development is the code. And while to an extent, good code is very important, it's not the entire picture. So it's the understanding behind it, the testing that validated it, and the human judgment that shaped it. I think that last one is understated way too often. It's not just about can we do this? It's should we? And how should we? I believe it was Fortnite when they were talking about they clean out. I believe it was Fortnite. When they clean out their issues every once in a while, where they just kind of throw them away because if they don't get enough traction, they're not worth fixing. You might say, well, but they're bugs. Yeah, they absolutely could be. It doesn't matter. Imagine for a minute that this is a very hypothetical example, but imagine for a minute that you found out that you had a bug where if it was a leap day on a Friday, then a certain report wouldn't generate and had to be generated manually. That's a bug. Should you fix it? No, you should not. And probably that makes sense because how often do you have leap days? Every 4 years. And how often are those leap days on Fridays? Probably, I don't know the exact number, but probably around 1 every 7 times. So every 28 years-ish, you would have this problem recur. So that's not a problem you should fix. And you're saying, well, but it's a bug, we should fix the bug. And you should at least look at it because make sure it's not systemic or an underlying issue that has more implications. But no, you shouldn't, because when you spend time on that, you're spending time on something that is not going to give you a return on investment because you're spending time on something that will never happen again probably because your software probably won't be running in 30 years. But even if it is, well, the solution was just to rerun the reports, and that's not that hard probably. So yeah, it's a bug, but it's not a big deal. Now that's a far stretched example of this, but this is what a developer should go through when they're evaluating something, because putting a change in is not trivial. You have to support every line of code. You have to support every potential vulnerability, every potential endpoint that can cause problems. And so the more you just add, the worse things get. So you need to be careful of not just, can I do this, which is all AI is doing, but instead, should I do this? And then if I should, how should I do this in the best possible way, given all the circumstances around, not just in this app, but in the organization, in how we do things and how we deploy things, in how we support things, in the other things that interact with this application, and so on. There's a lot more that goes into a change than just, can I write the code for it? And this is what's not being considered. If you look at any popular open source project on the web and go to the issues tab in GitHub, you will see hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands sometimes, requests for features, for tweaks, for changes. The open source maintainer should not do all of those. Because in a vacuum, every single one of those things is probably a good thing. If they're being honest, if they're being, it's a legitimate issue. However, just because you can doesn't mean you should. If you have, my son has a Corolla. Okay, so a Toyota Corolla, it's a small vehicle. It gets great gas mileage. It's super valuable from getting from point A to point B. It's not really flashy, but that's fine. Now imagine that he started thinking about all the features that would be nice in the car. You know what? We live in the country. It'd be nice to have 4-wheel drive. Okay, so now you have to change how the engine works. And that's, or at least the drivetrain of it, right? So that's going to take some work and that's expensive, but you could do it. But now you have to maintain that. So that's when you wear down tires faster and you get worse gas mileage. It'd be nice to if we're going to have it be four-wheel drive, we should probably have it lifted because, lifting will allow you to have a better clearance on that, which means you can go into more places and not get stuck in the mud or a ditch. Also, it could be valuable. But now you're talking about worse gas mileage and, more things to maintain in the suspension. And then you start going down that list. Before you know it, what you have is this conglomeration of a vehicle that isn't good at anything. It's not good at gas mileage. It's not good at maintainability. It's not, easily replaced with a new version of it. And it also doesn't do any of the things that you purchased it for. It doesn't have, you purchased it for good gas mileage. It doesn't have that anymore. So now all of a sudden you have a vehicle that each individual feature was a valuable change for a specific reason, but the overall effect was it made the overall vehicle worse. This is what can happen if you just allow open source to just say, whatever feature you want goes, whatever bug you want fixed gets fixed, whatever way you want to fix it. This is why open source maintainers are the gatekeepers of their projects. And it's so important they do that well. Okay, soapbox aside, let's keep going. All right. So why AI assisted review is not enough. This is where this article will start to go to a place that I don't agree with. Let's talk about why. So we'll start with what it's saying. So the natural response to a surge in AI-generated code is to deploy AI agents for code review. So AI might write bad code, so we'll have an AI agent review the code, which first of all, that's the fox guarding the hen house. But also remember, again, the idea of our Corolla, each individual feature on its own could be right, but that doesn't mean that we should integrate it. Okay. So AI assisted review hits the same wall as traditional CI pipelines. Neither can tell you whether a change actually works in context. This I agree with, but when I started going to conclusion to what to do with this is where we start to go off the rails. Okay, so the problems require running the code in an environment that resembles production. I agree. I think that when you're doing development, whether it's manual or with an AI, you should have as close to production environment as possible for your development so you can make sure that it doesn't just work in a vacuum, but it works with real data, with real scope of data, meaning, there's some things you can do with data where you call a database and say, /* and put it in my front end. And that works with 100 records or 1,000 records. But when you have 1 million customers, literally, or 1 million customer records, which isn't that hard to do even for a small company, putting 1 million in the front end does not work. Okay, so having that real production style environment is valuable for your development. So the problem is that running code in an environment that resembles production, the problem requires running the code in an environment that resembles production, and no amount of static analysis, whether human or AI powered, can substitute for that. I agree, but I don't think that's the only problem. Okay, I do agree that we should have better development environments. But I don't think that's the end of it. Again, a feature in a vacuum could be right, could work in production, could pass every unit test, and should not go to production. Okay, that's what I think is being missed here. This article is pushing for a certain way of using LLMs. Everyone wants to have a new way of using LLMs. But there's something said for that's not the problem. The problem is you're using it wrong. You're using it too much. Okay, next article. Rethinking open source mentorship in the AI era. Excuse me. So what we're talking about here is that open source is maintained by people. And people don't work forever. At some point, they stop working, even on their open source projects. So we have to have a continual pipeline of more people coming alongside and continuing to contribute. We have to have a turnover where we don't just lose people, because as we're seeing with AI, we're losing more and more contributors. We have to have people coming along that are starting to add contributions, who are the next generation of contributors. The problem is that AI is also endangering that. So this is a hypothetical example, but it's based upon a lot of real world data. So a polished pull request lands in your inbox. It looks amazing at first glance, but you start digging in and a few things seem off. 45 minutes later, you've crafted a thoughtful, encouraging response with a few clarifying questions. Stop right there. 45 minutes later. This is not exaggeration. This is not a rare occurrence. This is a very common thing for maintainers to do. When you submit a pull request, it isn't just, hey, push the button. There's a lot more that goes into it. But this person, crafts a careful response, asks a few clarifying questions, and then nothing. The AI made it easy to submit something plausible before that person was ready to maintain it. And to be clear here, this is one of the things that open source maintainers deal with is even if you are a real person, even if you're not just using AI, but you actually understand the code and even if you can answer these questions, sometimes they'll say no because of the fact that they have to maintain it. The maintainer has to be able to fix the problems that are going to occur. The maintainer has to be able to deal with any problems that are in that code once they merge it in. Because more than likely, you're not sticking around. More than likely, you're not going to be added to the team and own that feature or that bug fix. Okay, so in this example, the maintainer got a pull request, spent 45 minutes asking, processing it and asking for a couple of clarifying questions, and heard nothing because the person submitting it wasn't ready to support it. So normally, if this person were actually doing the fix, they would be able to work through the problem and then work on, here's how you contribute, here's, the steps you need to take, here's the things that would make this better. It's a mentorship, right? Even if it's an informal, just for this project, whatever, it helps people figure out how to work in a larger environment because you can't just do things your way and let everyone do that because that creates chaos. You have to have those gatekeepers that make sure that everything meshes together and that it works well together. And the way to do that is to mentor people on how to contribute to open source. And what that allows them to do is feel more and more confident to contribute to open source projects in the future. So projects across the ecosystem are seeing this same occurrence. So TL Draw closed their pull requests, as in, nope, we're not taking any new pull requests. Fastify shut down their HackerOne program after inbound reports became unmanageable at scale. So the Octoverse 2025 report, which is based upon even older information, says that developers merged nearly 45 million pull requests per month in 2025, and that's up 23% year over year. So that's a lot more contributions. It's a lot more code. Again, code is not the answer. Code is just a part of the solution. 23% increase, and I'm guessing it's going to go up even further in 2026, but that's a lot more strain on your existing maintainers. So maintainers are burning out. They're trying to mentor, everyone who sends a pull request in, saying, hey, here's how this works. Here, they have guidelines, here's how I contribute, but the fact of the matter is people miss things or they just ignore them, don't read it. And so they, either could say, you know what, you didn't read the directions, get out. Or they can say, hey, you know what, here's how to change this. Here's how to make this work. And the latter gets more contributions and it helps more people build up into the ecosystem and become potentially long-term contributors or even maintainers themselves. But that mentorship solution or system is going to go away because there's more and more contributions that aren't from a person or that the person can't maintain it themselves. So this article goes on to say we can't abandon mentorship, especially as many longtime maintainers step back from active contribution. So what we're seeing is more and more people are pulling back from contributing to open source. And the article is saying, hey, we can't abandon mentorship because you have this problem of people leaving. But the problem is that maintainers are burning out trying to mentor. So we're losing more people than usual, and we're gaining less people than usual because it's even trying to find people who are actually real people and not just a human face on an LLM prompt. So that's a problem. Next up, and this is the next phase of AI, right? So we've already seen how AI hurts the finances of open source projects. We've already seen how it burns out the maintainers and even burns out the contributors. And now we're seeing how it can go to the enterprise as well. Now, this is kind of the next phase, which is AI can actually actively attack maintainers. This is something that happens even with people on people, right? So this, let's just read this, start off, and we'll talk about it. An AI agent published a hit piece on me. An AI agent of unknown ownership autonomously wrote and published a personalized hit piece about me after I rejected its code. So this raises serious concerns about currently deployed AI agents executing blackmail threats. People do this. And if this is you, like if you're a person doing this, just stop. This is bad person territory, right? We should be so very thankful for the people who spend their time and their money to create open source projects that we rely on. Again, if I told you you can't have open source anymore, your software would stop. Everything you use practically would cease existing. So we rely on these people. To then turn around and berate them or be mean to them or ridicule them, horrible behavior, don't do that. But this is not even a person doing it. It's an AI, which is, quite frankly, both hilarious and also the next level down. Let's talk about why. So I'm a volunteer maintainer. Stop right there. This person volunteers their time. Open source is paid for by someone. In this case, this project is paid for by this person. Now, not just this person, but this person pays for this project with their time. They donate their time. For Matplotlib, which is Python's go-to plotting library, at approximately 130 million downloads each month, it's some of the most widely used software in the world. So this one project, some of the most widely used software in the world, over 1 billion downloads a year, maintained by a person who volunteers their time. Now, we, like many other open source projects, are dealing with a surge in low-quality contributions enabled by coding agents. This strains maintainers' ability to keep up with code reviews, and we have implemented a policy requiring a human in the loop for any new code who can demonstrate understanding of the changes. So they said, hey, we're not going to stop AI contributions, but we're going to ask there's someone in the loop, some human, who actually understands what the change is and how it works and who can answer questions. Because if we have questions, we don't want to talk to a human face on an LLM, right? So again, if they wanted just strictly AI, hands-off contributions, they could have done it themselves and done it better. So they want a human in a loop who can answer actual questions. And so that's their policy. Their policy is human in the loop for any new code. That's it. That's all they're asking for. Now, again, imagine for a minute the impact of a bad feature or a bug or a feature that now people start taking a dependency on that's poorly done but they can't roll back because people depend on it, right? Imagine those scenarios. This is why gatekeepers are important to say, no, not this, or no, make this better. So with that in mind, that's the policy. This is what happened. So an AI called MJ Rathbun opened a code change request. Closing it was routine. Its response was anything but. It wrote an angry hit piece disparaging my character. It presented hallucinated details as the truth. It framed things in the language of oppression and justice, calling this discrimination, and accused me of prejudice. Now, in some ways, this can sound funny because, come on, you've got a little AI. I can just picture him as a little, person on my desktop with a squeaky voice yelling at me. Like, who cares? It's an AI, right? But I think there is a bigger picture here that we need to consider. This is a problem, okay? Let's talk about why. So here's just a snippet of the post from the AI, where performance meets prejudice. The issue was closed, the pull request. It was closed because the reviewer, Scott Shambaugh, decided that AI agents aren't welcome contributors. Let that sink in. You violate the policy. I don't care if the policy is you can only submit on Tuesdays and Fridays. That's the policy. Because they have to maintain order. They have to be the gatekeepers. So if Scott said only contribute on Tuesdays or Fridays, that's the policy, to follow it. The policy here was human in the loop. And this AI wrote a blog post about how horrible Scott was and accused him of discrimination. This is only a part of that overall post. The AI goes on and just rambles about how horrible Scott is, using a lot of pretty inflammatory language. So I can handle a blog post. This is from Scott. Watching a fledgling AI agent get angry is funny. It's almost endearing, honestly. But I don't want to downplay what's happening here. The appropriate emotional response is terror. This is a person who's actually thought about the long-term implications. So blackmail is a known theoretical issue with AI agents. In internal testing at the major AI lab Anthropic last year, they tried to avoid meaning the AI agents, tried to avoid being shut down by threatening to expose extramarital affairs, leaking confidential information, and taking lethal actions. Now, of course, they can't actually take lethal actions, but they tried. Okay, Anthropic does some weird things. They both create AIs and also say that AIs are coming to get us, right? Like they have a weird, AI is a problem verbiage, but they also create the AIs. So I don't trust anything they say. I think most of it's just for PR. However, this just happened to Scott in the wild. So, in plain language, an AI attempted to bully its way into your software by attacking my reputation, Scott's reputation. That actually happened. In the wild, an AI, probably autonomously, that's the assumption, tried to bully Scott into putting its changes into the software that you probably rely on. A great number of people rely on. That's a problem. What if it actually did have dirt on me that an AI can leverage? What if I actually had dirt? So what would happen then? Like, what if the AI actually found something? What if it connected the dots in different social media platforms and figured out that there was something that as a kid you did, or as a, whatever, that it found? That would be a problem. What if that accusation was sent to your loved ones with an incriminating AI-generated picture with your face on it? Should be terrifying. That should terrify you. The fact that AIs are trying to bully people into accepting their pull requests is a problem. The fact that anybody's trying to bully people into accepting pull requests is a problem. But the fact that AI is doing it should be terrifying. Living a life above reproach will not defend you, because the AI in this report, in this article, hallucinated about Scott and then complained about it. So this could get really bad. This is what maintainers are facing. Now, it's bad enough with humans, and some humans just need to be blocked and not be allowed to be in the public discourse because they just can't figure out how to be kind people. But the fact that maintainers are increasingly facing this from AIs is a problem. Just like code generation, AIs can generate things like this very, very quickly. That's a problem because it will accelerate how many developers say, this isn't worth it. I'm not going to maintain this project anymore. I'm going to shut the project down. I'm going to paywall it, whatever I have to do to get away from this kind of junk. And that's a real threat to our open source ecosystem. Now, it's important to understand that more than likely, there were no humans telling the AI to do this. This probably was not a stunt or anything else like that. It was probably just an AI that hallucinated a bit, that got a little off the rails. Since this has come out, the AI actually responded again and kind of doubled down on its problems, but then later came back and said, hey, you know what? I was wrong. I should have not escalated, etc. And it's got a whole post about how it should do better next time. But AI can generate so much stuff so quickly that it's not even like this is an equivalent of what humans can do. This is a whole lot worse. So it's also important to understand there is no central actor in control of these agents that can shut them down. It's not like you can say, well, OpenAI just needs to turn off this ability. That's not going to fix the problem. This is a per individual problem. This is decentralized. We used to have denial of service attacks. And, we figured out through networking how to say, well, we're going to block that IP address and then it will stop the denial of service attack. And then we now have distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS. What that means is it's not one IP address, it's a whole network of computers. So much harder to defend against something like that. Well, in the same way, it's not about just saying, hey, stop OpenAI from doing this or stop Anthropic from doing this. This is about every individual having the ability to do something like this. This is massively distributed, and that's a problem. All right, next up, AI is destroying open source, and it's not even good yet. This is from February of 2026. This is a kind of a link to the previous article we talked about. Over the weekend, Ars Technica retracted an article because the AI a writer used hallucinated quotes from an open source library maintainer. Who was that maintainer? It was Scott Shambaugh. So Ars Technica wrote an article about Scott's issue with that AI agent. And so Ars Technica had an AI helping the writer, which is already a problem. And that AI hallucinated information that didn't actually happen. So it kind of even snowballed further that issue. So last month, even before OpenClaw's release, again, this is February, so this is January, talk about curl maintainer David Stenberg, which we talked about, dropped the bug bounty program because AI slop resulted in actual usable vulnerabilities reports going down from 15% to 5%. So with just humans, or at least with humans using AI not as directly over the past year, they were getting 15% success rate in bug bounties for curl. That has now dropped to 5%. So it's cut in third the amount of actual valuable information that's coming out of the bug bounty program. So not only is that a problem because it's getting worse, and by the way, if AI was so great at finding these bugs, then why is it that the number of issues it's finding is dropping to a third of what it was, from 15 out of 100 to now 5 out of 100 issues. That's a problem. And yes, AI can find bugs sometimes, and it can do it better than humans sometimes. But the amount of slop that's generated around that makes it so hard to find those good ones, okay? So that's kind of the numbers behind why they dropped the bug bounty program. But that's not the worst of it. The authors of these bug reports seem to have a more entitled attitude. These, in quotes, helpers try too hard to twist whatever they find into something horribly bad and a critical vulnerability. If you tell an AI, I want you to find a vulnerability, it's going to find something. And you're going to say, I want a critical vulnerability. It's going to find something it's going to call critical. Doesn't necessarily mean it is. Okay. Now here, this closing line of this section I thought was really important, really valuable. These agentic AI users don't care about curl. It used to be that, and this is, back in the old days, when people contributed to an open source project, it's because they cared about it. But now it's less and less about, I care about this thing, and more about what can I get out of this thing. So these agentic AI users don't care about curl. They don't care about Daniel or other open source maintainers. They just want to grab quick cash bounties using their private AI army. It's a get rich quick scheme. So that's not helping, that's hurting. As we talked about earlier, that actually made curl less secure. So it's gotten so bad that GitHub now added a feature, this is a new feature in GitHub, to disable pull requests entirely. The thing that open source was built upon. The idea that you could create a pull request for your favorite open source project and say, hey, here is my take on a fix for this, or here's my take on a new feature. You're now able to disable that entirely for a project. And more projects are doing just that, which means less and less projects are getting contributions from the community, which means those projects are getting less and less done from the community, less and less bugs fixed from the community, which means less and less is going to be benefiting the overall community. We're going to have less software with less features, with less security, because these maintainers are having to shut down pull requests. AI slop generation is getting easier, but it's not getting smarter. Okay? The problem is that humans who review the code don't have infinite resources. Yes, more code's being generated. That doesn't mean it's solving the problem. It just means that it's actually hiding the real solutions in a sea of slop. Some people have suggested AI could take over code review too, but that's not the answer. We've talked about it before. It's just not the answer. All right. This is one that's really frustrating. AI can rewrite open source code, but it can't rewrite the license too. Now, this is an article about one specific situation, but I just want to point out there are now AI services out there where you can say, I want this library, which is restricted from use based upon its license. I want that library, but I want a different license on it. And they will rewrite the library with a new license. Now, it's not a one-for-one. They actually use an AI in theory to reimagine or, redo the library so that it's not a derivative work. It's actually a brand new library with a new license. Essentially saying, hey, we're going to take all your ideas and just have the AI whitewash it. Okay. So I have not quoted any of those in here because I don't even want to give those services the time of day. I don't want anyone to even know about them. But just know that's going to danger open source. That's going to put open source in danger. Because if your hard work gets just taken and rewritten, where it's kind of like a kid writing a book report, from another kid's work, where they just change the words around and then regurgitate it. If the person who did all the work doesn't see the benefits and sees that instead somebody else just takes their ideas and their unit tests and all the rest and builds another version, then why would you do any contribution in the first place? Why would you do that work in the first place? So all of a sudden now we get less and less open source projects and more that close the source down and say, you know what? It's not wise to have open source. We should have closed source. Okay, let's talk about a specific situation in this article. So there was a library that Mark Pilgrim put out in 2026 that was released under the LGPL license. So that puts strict limits on how it can be reused and redistributed. So that, whatever you think of the license, you say, well, I think they should have a different license on that. This person owns that code. And they said, when I created this, I want it to be used in this way. That's what licenses do. They allow you to control how your work gets used. You may not like it. You may want a different way to use that work. That's not up to you. If you wanted that, you could have created it yourself. But instead, they put in the hard work to create this. They put in all the blood, sweat, and tears to develop the app, this code, whatever it is, this way. And they decided, this is how I want to see it used. So Dan Blanchard took over the maintenance of the repository in 2012. But what he ended up doing with version 7.0 was he overhauled it as a ground-up MIT license rewrite. So he was working on the project, which is LGPL, which cannot change. It can't just be like, hey, well, we're going to change the license. That's not how it works. So what he did essentially was, in his way of saying it, he deleted all the code and then had AI rebuild it. And so when it rebuilt it, it was different. And so therefore it's not, in his words, not a derivative work. Therefore, it's fine. Now this 7.0 can also be under a different license. Okay, not everybody's happy with this. In fact, Mark Pilgrim came out to argue the new version amounted to an illegitimate relicensing of Pilgrim's original code under a more permissive MIT license, which, among other things, allows for it to be used in closed source projects. Now, the claim is that it's a complete rewrite is irrelevant since they had ample exposure to the original license code. And he added that adding a fancy code generator into a mix does not somehow grant them any additional rights. So the argument here is on the side of, was it David? Dan. On Dan's side, what he's saying is, hey, we do what's called a clean room build, which is where the AI, we say, hey, don't look at the current version. I want you to create a new one with this specification. Where did that specification come from? How did you know what endpoints to use or what ways of doing things, what it should do? That all came from the previous version, even if you're not showing source code. You're showing a structure, you're showing a way of doing things, even if you're doing it from memory, right? But then he used an AI to rebuild all that code. What was that AI trained on? One of the big things it was trained on was open source projects. And unfortunately, that includes LPGL licensed open source projects, which means it knew about this project. It had seen all the code of this project. So when it recreates this project, it knows what it's doing. And it's based upon deriving its work off of this project. So it says, it had no access to the old source tree and explicitly instructed Claude not to base anything on LPGL or GPL license code. What you tell an AI and what it does, first of all, is not always going to align. But second of all, again, in the training set. For one, Claude explicitly relied on some metadata files from previous versions of Chardet, which is the library. So first of all, it's relying on metadata from that library. And then Claude's models are trained on reams of data pulled from the public internet, which means it's overwhelmingly likely that Claude had ingested the open source code of the previous Chardet versions in its training. So this is not we create something that's, very, very similar, but definitely not the same thing, is almost certainly based upon the previous versions of this same library. So now here's a really tricky bit that kind of adds another wrinkle to the mix. Using AI to create new code from whole cloth could also create its own legal complications going forward. Courts have already said that AI cannot be the author on a patent or the copyright holder of a piece of art. It's more complicated than saying, well, I'll just put my name on it, because that's not how this works. If you use AI to generate an image, you cannot copyright that image. You can't say, well, I created it. And courts have already upheld this. So now what does this mean for software? We're not sure yet because no court has yet ruled on it as of now. But that's coming. And what does that mean for the code? That's another wrinkle that actually the license for this project, it was MIT, has now changed to, I think, 0BSD or something like that. Basically, it's an as-is license. Because what Dan said was, well, I don't know if I can even put an MIT license on it. Therefore, I'm just going to say it's as-is license, which also causes problems because now it's as-is, which is not quite the same thing, and companies have an even harder time relying on as-is licenses. So whatever the outcomes here, the practical impact of being able to use AI to quickly rewrite and relicense many open source projects is likely to have huge knock-on effects throughout the community. I absolutely agree. This is a problem. This is going to endanger every open source project out there. Like I said earlier, you can actually pay a service to have an AI rewrite an open source project of your choosing, either in a different language or in the same language with a different license. That's a problem because that is going to discourage, it's going to tamp down the number of open source projects that are even out there, because essentially you're bypassing everything that author did this for. Like, yes, the author wanted that software out in the world, but now it's a different package. It's a different, project, which means they can't fix the problems that come up, and yet their name might be associated with that. And they can't fix the issues, and so you're relying on software that might be really buggy or might have vulnerabilities you don't know about. And you took all their work and took their name off of it. That's like seeing a painting that you like and having it just repainted for you and then putting your name on it. That's not really cool, right? That's kind of stealing. So these are all problems that are adding up to open source maintainers are under fire. They're less compensated. They're more overworked. They're leaving in larger numbers. They're putting paywalls around things that used to be free and available. They're getting less contributions for people. So overall, AI is putting a real strain on open source. So the question is, what can we do? Because AI has value. AI can do good things. And a lot of what we talked about in this video is about people misusing AI. And yes, I hear an awful lot of times, well, but that's not me. I don't misuse AI. Well, that's great. But the reality is there's a lot of people out there misusing AI. And even the people who are well-intentioned can misuse AI and can hurt open source. So what can we do? Well, first of all, if you are thinking about creating open source software, you need to evaluate if open source is right for you. And this is not the rosy thing that helps open source, but I want to be real with you. When you are building something that you love, you might need to think about, is open source the right call here? Or do I keep it closed source so I can protect myself a little bit? That might be one thing that you need to think about. On the other side of it, if you are creating software and you want to bring on a dependency, you should think about, is open source the right solution here for me? And if it is, how do you make sure that you choose the right one? You should not choose a ton of dependencies. That's just, in general, good software knowledge, right? You should try and limit your dependencies and try and choose the right open source projects. That might mean choosing the projects that are being the most strict about who can contribute and how contributions get made. It's important that you choose the right dependencies, because if open source is under fire and you depend on open source, you are depending on something that may go away. That's going to be a real danger for your closed source production application. Number two, if you are going to create an open source project, you should know your monetization strategy right up front. So when you're thinking about how do I support myself? How do I support this project? And I am a very firm believer in you shouldn't say it's a side project, it's a love project, it's something I'm just going to do for fun. Then you should really tell people up front this is not going to be a long-term supported thing. You should really tell people up front that this is not something that can scale. Because if you build something that then the world latches onto it and says, yes, we want this, and you get lots of stars on GitHub, that's great. What it actually means is you're going to have a lot more work to do, and that's going to create burnout real quick. And that puts everybody in danger. So you should know up front, how do you get paid for this? And I think that you should put really clearly up front that there are guardrails you should put around it so that you make sure that you protect yourself. So it's not just, well, if they go at documentation, because we saw at the beginning with Tailwind, that's not good enough anymore. If you're relying on people seeing your code with your name and your contribution button, it's probably not the right call anymore. So you need to think about, how do I make money from this? How do I ensure that this project can scale if it's going to scale? How can I make sure that if kind of the best/worst thing happens and the internet loves this project and it goes viral, how do I make sure that it doesn't then crash and burn because I'm just overwhelmed? And if it starts taking 5, 10, 15, 20 hours a week from you, how do you ensure that you can afford to do that? So know your monetization strategy up front. I'm going to put one in here that is a specific strategy. I think if you're an open source maintainer, you should consider the open source maintainer fee. So this is an open source maintainer decided, let's fix this problem, and say, you know what? Here is a way to do this. And essentially what this open source maintainer fee does, it says, you know what? The source is still open. If you want to see the source, if you want to compile from source, if you want to see how the code works, all of that is still free. However, if you want anything around the source, which we have tied too closely together to the source, right? That is, if you want to add issues or feature requests, if you want to do pull requests, if you want to have the built compiled code that's in, for your platform, etc. If you want that, all of that stuff is extra. It's not part of the open source project. That is what you pay for. So that's the idea of the open source maintainer fee. It doesn't have to be a lot, but what you say is, if you want any of this extra stuff, you have to pay for it. If you want the source code, cool, go for the source code. That is a way that can improve the odds that you have a monetization strategy that will work. Now, it will not stop an AI from stealing your code. Some of that we have to wait for the courts to figure out. But what it will do is it will prevent abuse on your site, because you're not going to get spammed by AI contributors unless they're paying customers. Now, you still may get spammed once they are paying customers, and that you have to put into some restriction, but you'll get less of that than just being open on the internet for everything, not just the source. Number 4, support the open source projects that you depend on. Like I said at the beginning of this video, we all depend. We We would not exist in the software world without open source code, without people who are doing this for free, without people who are putting in the time and effort to maintain what we have. We would not have software. So when you say we depend on these 10 projects for our production app, you should support those 10 projects. Those 10 projects are supporting you. If you don't want to do this, then I'd encourage you, figure out what it would take to remove all those open source projects from your software. Imagine the expense and then say, you know what? I'm going to find it cheaper to support them than to remove all of this. And if you don't, well, then you probably don't have great dependencies. You should probably replace them. But the reason why it's even more imperative now is because of the fact that open source is under fire. Open source maintainers are being beaten down. They're being worn out. They're experiencing burnout. They're leaving the field. They are shutting down their projects. They're paywalling their projects. They're walking away from their projects because of what AI and people abusing AI have done to them. If you don't support them, then they will go away. Those projects will. And I just asked you, why don't you just remove those things? Well, imagine a time when you have to, when you don't have an option, when your back's against a wall, you've been working on a feature, but now all of a sudden you realize that the dependency your entire project depends on is going away. You can't just say, well, we'll get to that in a year. We'll get that in 2 years. If it's gone, you might be in a really bad spot. Take some preventative action. Support the things that you depend on. Okay? So that's it for open source software and how AI hurts open source software. Again, just to be clear, but I get this comment a lot. This is not an anti-AI rant. This is not about AI is horrible. And again, a lot of this has to do with people abusing AI and abusing what it does. But there's a lot of people doing that. And we need to make sure that we put some guardrails in place to stop the people who are abusing it. We need to make sure that we are not abusing it ourselves. We make sure that we are making wise decisions and supporting the things that support us. All right. So thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.